Thanks, everyone, for joining us, the Project Censored radio show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your co-host, Eleanor Goldfield, along with Mickey Huff. And we're very glad to welcome back to the program Professor Richard Wolff, who's a professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He's the founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His books include The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, Understanding Socialism, and Understanding Marxism, which all can be found at democracyatwork.info. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Eleanor, for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
So I wanted to start pulling from a Stephen Semler article. He does great work analyzing and explaining data. He writes, quote, since 2001, Gallup has asked U.S. voters whether they think their financial situation is getting better, staying the same, or getting worse. This year, a record number of Americans answered getting worse. The 53% who said their financial situation is deteriorating surpasses the 49% who said so during the 2008 financial crisis. Crisis-level economic anxiety is the new normal, end quote. So basically, this means that the percentage of Americans very or moderately worried about not being able to make minimum credit card payments, not being able to pay rent or mortgage, and not being able to maintain a living standard has risen sharply. So, Professor Wolff, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this delightful situation we're in, because you talk a lot about on your show how capitalism has these necessary downfalls. And it seems like we're well past due, even with the pandemic that happened. So what is your read on the current situation?
Well, let me pick up by what you said. It is clearly not a cyclical phenomena because we haven't hit another economic downturn. The last big number that you quoted just now from the poll was in 2008 and 9. Let's remember that was the second worst crash in the history of capitalism, exceeded in its horror only by what happened in the Great Depression of the 1930s. So to say that we are now, when we are not in a crash, at least not in the moment, that we have the same anxiety, tells us that this is an anxiety about long-term trends, about long-term evolutions of the system. If the financial press of this day, today, and of the last few weeks is any guide, then the majority of commentators, left, right, and center, believe that we're headed for another economic downturn, either later this year or in 2026 for sure. We are kind of due. They come every 4 to 7 years, and the last one was 2020. Here we are 5.5 years later. We're due for one. So if these numbers are bad before we have it, imagine what they're going to look like 6 months or a year from now when we're in the one that we expect to hit. Okay, what is it that's going on? I would argue, and here I'm not wearing any hat, but imagine me with my professor's economic hat. We are hearing from the mass of people what they experience and feel about the economy they live in. And I would take them very seriously. I always do. I think there's more wisdom in the collective working class than anywhere else in this society, certainly more so than among my colleagues who are professional economists, who mostly should be ashamed of themselves, but put that aside for a while. Many of them mean well, it's not that. But here's what I think is going on. The top 10% of the American people are doing pretty well. And let me remind you who those people are, since you and I and folks like us are ever further away from them. These are the people who own 80% of the shares on the stock market. The top 10% own 80% of the shares. And why is that important? Because the stock market's doing real well. They are all buying and selling shares from one another to one another. And they raise the price each time, which makes them feel real good at the end of the month because the value of their shares has crawled up a few notches. And so, at least on paper, they're wealthier than they were last month. The other 90% don't own a significant amount of shares. Or maybe they have 3 that were given to them on their 18th birthday by grandma or something like that. But that's not significant in our economy. Let me give you another statistic that came out from Bloomberg the other day, that half of the consumer purchases in the United States, half, are accounted for by the top 10% of our people. Let me drive that home. We are told that ours is a consumer-focused economy, and there's some truth to that in the sense that most of the goods and services coming out of enterprises are purchased by consumers. Taken as a whole, they're a bigger factor than businesses are. But once you look below that big number, you disaggregate for a moment, you discover that it's the richest 10% who are half of everything that's purchased in a store in this country. In other words, the mass of people are struggling to have half of what's available to buy. The other 10% buy the other half. And you know what that means? It means exactly what these people are saying in the polling. They know, without the statistics being available, they know that somehow the advertising, the stores, the pictures, the show, it's for that rich group up there. Because I see what I cannot afford. I can see who buys, who is having a good time going down to, I'm here in Manhattan, so going to Fifth Avenue and looking at the fancy shops with the beautiful outfits and all the rest of it. But I know that I can't go in there. They would throw me out, if not physically, then with their looks, they would throw me out of there. And I know I don't belong. And that notion, I'm not part of this. All the hoopla. I believe President Trump said today, that we are the greatest economy we've ever been and the greatest economy in the world. None of that is true. And we all know that that's what he does. He talks it up because the reality is so sadly lacking for it. But the truth of it is we are a divided society economically, more than ever. And it's showing up, as it always does, politically, ideologically, and culturally. We are divided. The level of hatred is obvious. Even people who don't normally talk about it see it, at least mention it. They have their own self-serving interpretations of who's hating who for what. But we kind of know that the level of discourse is extraordinary in the hostilities people feel they are entitled to give. We have seen the return of white supremacy we thought was long past in our history. We have seen a kind of revenge movement responding to the Me Too, as women made an effort to change their subordination in this culture. We have seen culture wars so far because nobody yet, not the Republicans and not the Democrats, is willing to point the finger at where the culprit lies. And if you'll allow me, it's not immigrants, those 10 to 12 million undocumented immigrants among the poorest people in the world who've just torn up whatever life they had, traveled thousands of miles to enter a society whose language they don't know, whose rules they don't know. To blame them for the economic malaise of a country of 330 million is craziness before you get to any detail. It's nutty. It makes no sense. Those people haven't the money, the power, the skills, or anything to shape the overall American economy. Or to blame the Chinese, or to Stop it. We all know, really, we do. In the 1970s, American corporate executives made the decision it's more profitable to move production out of the United States to China and India and Brazil than it is to keep it here. And they did that. They moved it. And those who didn't move it replaced workers with computers, then robots, and now artificial intelligence. We know that. It's all around us. So the blame goes to the people who are driven by profit to take the steps that caused our difficulties. But that's a taboo in our culture. We can't criticize the people who run the society because we can't face that. So instead of the economic war, we have a cultural war. We decide to go after one another by calling each other terrible names and by scapegoating, which is the traditional quasi-fascistic way to cope with capitalism when it breaks down. So for me, yeah, I see this statistic. I know why people feel bad. You have a government that is planning to send the military into our cities when our mayors and governors of our states and cities say we don't need them, we don't want them. What are you doing? You're provoking what? You're provoking violence. You're provoking bitterness. And of course, people's notion of my future is clouded, is depressed, is negative. We have a president who said, elect me so I can stop these endless wars. Wars he inherited were in, let's remember, were in Gaza and they were in the Ukraine. And those wars are roaring ahead. He didn't stop anything. Meanwhile, he attacked Iran. That's a new one. And he's now provoking Venezuela. That's a new one, too. He hasn't ended the endless wars. He proliferates them. You know,
Yeah.
these are, every one of them is a particular. But when you add them up, and I could keep going, you understand why people are giving that kind of an answer to a pollster. I mean, we living at a very, very rough time in this culture because the old empire of the United States, the old days, they're gone. And wearing a red hat that says make it great again ain't gonna bring them back.
It's not that easy, huh?
No.
Well, and I mean, you mentioned immigration, and of course, the dangerous immigration, if you want to call it immigration, is of course the what you were talking about in the 70s. Shipping these corporate jobs or the corporations shipping jobs overseas. But on the other side, of course, not scapegoating the people that are responsible. We've talked about immigration before, you and I on this show, but I wanted to turn to several reports that have been coming out basically since Trump took office and really turbocharged this attack on immigrants. So back in July, USA Today reported that ICE raids and mass deportations could cost California's economy, which is the largest economy in the nation and fourth largest in the world, could cost that economy $275 billion. Reports show slowed growth and inflation due to labor shortages, which then, of course, means declining productivity, often in areas that we need it most, like agriculture, construction, care work, and hospitality. A report by Economic Insights and Research Consulting found that between March and July of 2025 alone, the agricultural industry saw a total drop in employment of 155,000 workers. So, I mean, I feel that you should care about the Gestapo attacking immigrants just because you're a human, but also if you were just cold hard facts, like let me just look at the numbers of the situation, that would also be bad. Could you talk about what this is doing to our economy, this roided up response and attack on immigrant communities, and what we should expect to see economically as this continues?
Yeah, let me give an example beyond those that you just went through, because those are perfectly good examples. But let me give you another one, which is in its own way just as significant. A few weeks ago, the ICE military army decided to make its largest arrest so far. With great hoopla and with an abundance of idiocy, they brought along photographers. They attacked a lithium battery factory in Georgia that had been invited there by the governor of Georgia. Two South Korean corporations, Hyundai and LG, huge corporations, under pressure from their South Korean government, had decided to invest in building up that factory in Georgia to make batteries for electric cars and trucks. There were about 450 workers, about 300 odd were from South Korea. They were there because they know how the machinery works. They can read the instructions in South Korean. They have experience. They can start the factory going and then train Americans to take those jobs. What did ICE do? ICE swooped in, its biggest operation to date, arrested all 450 of the workers there, put them in handcuffs and chains. I don't know if you saw the press pictures, chains around their bodies and between their legs and around their ankles, in the way that you chain up somebody who might be violent or somebody with a proven record. And even then, you're supposed to take it easy. These are people who committed no crime, who are charged with no crime. They are immigrants. They may have visa issues, which is how every other country deals with this kind of a situation. You have a visa issue, you have to go and fill out some forms, or in the worst case, you have to leave. The workers were traumatized. They've given press conferences afterwards. Long story short, they were put on a plane and sent back to South Korea, the 300 or so. The factory is shut down. It will not reopen for months, if then. When those workers got back, they were treated as heroes returning to the Seoul airport. They had been victimized by the United States government. The people of South Korea were horrified and said so. And the leaders of the two corporations said, to accommodate your pressure, we made a decision to invest in your country, which you asked us to do, and then you send your army to disrupt and abuse. You must be kidding. All right. What does this tell us? Besides the chaos of the Trump government, that literally one hand does not know what the other hand is doing, and one hand smacks the other one right in the face. But beside that, what we are seeing is a level of herky-jerky policy that can only have the opposite effect of what it intends. What that story about the Georgia factory, which has zoomed around the world, been headlines all over the world, it tells every capitalist around the world, think long and hard before you spend a lot of money and a lot of your time moving your factory to a place that's falling apart, that has no reasonable government, where the government is talking about putting troops in the streets of its major cities, causing God knows what level of chaos and trouble. And then a president who has a tariff one day, a week later drops it, another week later puts it in, a week after that doubles it. You can't make an economic decision. No corporate executive is going to risk his or her career making a decision to move into a chaos of this sort. And so, of course, it isn't happening. Mr. Trump keeps promising to bring jobs back, but they're not coming. And they're not coming for any mysterious reason. They're not coming because of him, because of his policies, which, look, they weren't coming before because the wages are cheaper out there, because the support you get from the government there is big and positive. And here you have to worry about an ICE raid. So, in fact, it's the policies that are producing the opposite. And what is that doing? Requiring the president to do even more in the way of bluster and pretense and faking it, because he has to theatrically do what in reality he is not doing. And that's the core that makes people feel rightly that most of us are in an economy going down, and the person we elected is busy, feathering his own nest and nobody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to, with the time that we have left, I want to get into something that people don't often associate with economics, which is imagination. But indeed, I feel like the lack of imagination is what has us, poring over jobs reports inside the cage of capitalism without ever questioning, wait, why? Why are these the jobs that we have?
Right.
The jobs that they say we need. For instance, there's a push for a new supermax prison in Kentucky. And one of the main arguments is, well, folks in that area need jobs. Let me tell you what Kentucky needs. It needs reclamation from a century plus of coal mining. It needs better education, better healthcare, green energy, infrastructure. So, Professor Wolff, wrapping up here, could you talk a little bit about like this issue with jobs? It's always the argument. We're always talking about, well, we need jobs and jobs and jobs and jobs. Because you could really give somebody a job doing anything, right? You could give somebody a job planting trees or feeding squirrels or, giving kids pep talks at bus stops. Like you could give someone a job doing anything. So why are we stuck in this death-making job spiral? And what is it about capitalism that constrains us to think about survival just in that space?
There's a reason for that. And it's very good that you pointed out, and you're absolutely right. The economics profession has had the imagination beaten out of it by its experience. And just to show you that you're right, even in another way, in the 1930s, when the capitalist system we live in collapsed, one of the things that the socialist parties and the Communist Party pushed for, and they got from Franklin Roosevelt, the president, was a program of federal jobs. 15 million of them, 15 million American unemployed people who stopped being unemployed because they got a job. And here's what they did. They said, what do we need? Here comes the imagination. What do we need? Well, one of the things they came up with, just one, I'll give you an example, because Americans were very creative when you asked them to use their imagination. Turns out they had a good one. It's called the WPA. And one of the things the WPA said was, in America, culture, music, opera, theater, painting, sculpture, every poetry is highly concentrated in a few parts of the country, typically in certain large cities. But for the average person, and remember the 1930s, we don't have TV yet, we barely have radio. For most people, they can't access, too far away. There is no local opera or anything. So what we ought to do is we ought to say to the, at that time, millions of artistically creative people, filmmakers, poets, we'll hire you. We'll set you up as a group, a filmmaking group, or a sculpture group, or a poetry group. And we'll move you around the country to villages and small towns where you will not only put on a performance, but you'll have workshops. You'll stay for a couple of weeks. We'll pay for all of that, and you will bring culture to people who are hungry for it. It was a roaring success. People came out in huge. Every child that had shown an aptitude for something was brought by mother and father to see whether they might catch hold in terms of their imagination with what a skilled poet or a skilled movie maker might do with and for them. Don't tell me there aren't jobs. And those were the jobs that were given to millions of people. The Golden Gate Bridge that people admire in San Francisco was built by workers who said, let's do this. The national parks that Americans like to go to, many of them, Yosemite and on, were built by those workers at that time. We did things we knew were wonderful that our imagination. But now to answer your question, why do we talk only about jobs? The answer is, in our society called capitalism, we hold the question of jobs hostage. You're only going to get a job if it is profitable for some employer to give you one. And if it isn't profitable, they don't have to do it. We don't care that you don't have a job. We don't care what that costs your family, your children, your loved ones. We don't care. We don't care at all. Here's the rule. Find someone who can make money off of hiring you, and you'll get a job. And if you can't find someone, your fault, you won't have a job. And so we'll talk forever about jobs because we want to talk about helping the employer give you a job. Why? How are we going to do that? Give them a subsidy, give them a tax break. Every city in America right now, because I work with them, has an office that sucks up to potential employers to bring them into this town, that village, that state. That's why Hyundai and LG were in Georgia with that battery plant, because they're working to, they're giving the people profits so they turn around and give people jobs, as if the issue were jobs and the only way to get them was to pander to profiteers. That was never true. It isn't true now, and no one should be fooled.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like that trope that landlords provide housing. Actually, no, they don't. They withhold housing.
That's
Housing is
right.
a thing that exists when you build it. Landlords don't build it, so they just withhold it.
Well, in the Middle Ages, there was no, in many parts of the Middle Ages, particularly in early, there was no such thing as rent. If you had asked people then, and there were a few, why is there no rent? The answer would come from the Roman Catholic Church, which was the universal church at that time. And the answer was simple in their minds of the priests. Did the human being put the land there? No. Who put the land there? Who are you to charge rent? You had nothing to do with it. And if we don't pay you the rent, we've noticed something. The land is still there. When you pay rent, you're paying the person who owns it. The land doesn't get it or require it. Why do we do it? We allow more and more of the money we all earn, the work we do, to funnel into the hands of the landlords who did nothing to put the land where it is or to make it yield that kind of a payment. If you're going to charge rent, good. Collect the money and then use it to help the society, because it's only where the society chose to live that put the rent up high in the first place. It's crazy, but it is convenient to the landlord, and that's why we have it. But I don't want to go out on a negative note. Here I am sitting in New York City. I'm about to elect, if the thing looks the way it does now, a Muslim socialist, one of whose major proposals is to do something about the insane rent that is the norm here in New York City. So the opposition is building. And to the surprise of everyone, a young man who's a Muslim socialist is the next mayor of New York City. It tells you that your question about imagination, it's coming back, and it may surprise us in the forms that it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also offers this window into alternatives, and that alternatives do exist. It's just that our electoral system ensures that most of the time those never see the light of day. So so Professor Wolff, thank you so much for once again taking these obtuse and abstract concepts and putting them in a way that even an economic idiot like myself can understand. Folks, please check out all of Professor Wolff's work at democracyatwork.info. And really, the show Economic Update is incredible, and I highly recommend that as well. Professor Wolff, thank you so much.
Thank you, Eleanor, and best wishes to you, and my appreciation for all the work that Project Censored does, because all I can tell you is we need it more now than ever.